Hello, my name is Deanna Portero, and I'm the Vice President of Partnerships and Innovation at the Orphan Therapeutics Accelerator, a nonprofit biotech that rescues stalled clinical stage ultra rare assets that have been shelved either because their profit margins are insufficient to attract traditional investors or because capital constrained companies have to have more lucrative opportunities to pursue. Today's panel asks the most important question, arguably, that we will discuss at this entire conference. How do we, as an industry, support rare and ultra-rare diseases? In many sessions, expert speakers have insisted on the strategic wisdom of applying advanced therapies to the diseases where they make the most biological sense, to diseases where gene and cell therapies are the unrivaled biological solution. Rare and ultra-rare diseases, 80% of which are monogenic, are indisputably that. Every single platform technology that's discussed at this conference has extraordinary power. Every firm, every company in attendance has cultivated the ability to unlock awe-inspiring amounts of potential from those platforms. Still, there's obvious gaps when it comes to these technologies being applied to the diseases that need them most. Of the 10,000 rare diseases that affect 30 million people in the US and 450 million people worldwide, fewer than 1,000 have FDA-approved treatments. Today's panelists will highlight many of the barriers to realizing the potential of advanced therapies for rare and ultra-rare diseases and provide actionable insights about what industry can do to ensure that our shared work reaches patients who need it the most. Our first speaker will be Andrea Boitnott, a rare pediatric neurological researcher driven by a desire to translate scientific discoveries into tangible healthcare solutions. At Elpida Therapeutics, Andrea plays a pivotal role in identifying strategic opportunities for growth and expansion. With a robust background in both scientific research and business acumen, Andrea brings a unique blend of skills to her role at Elpida. She leads the evaluation of potential partnerships, collaborations, and licensing agreements to advance the company's pipeline and accelerate the development of innovative therapies. Andrea leverages her scientific expertise to assess the scientific merit and commercial potential of new opportunities, ensuring alignment with Elpida's mission and objectives. Welcome.
Thank you, everyone, for coming to the session today, and thank you to the Facilitate team for inviting the Elpida group out to speak at many of the sessions at Advanced Therapies Week. I'm going to talk about a new paradigm for advancing rare and ultra-rare disease solutions. I'm Andrea, a Business Development and Strategy intern at Elpida Therapeutics. So every rare disease stakeholder knows that there's a great unmet need to bring treatments to patients with rare diseases. 1 in 10 people globally have a rare disease. 50% of rare disease patients are children, and 3 in 10 of those children with a rare disease won't live to see their 5th birthday. Despite the clinical burden, 95% of rare diseases don't have an approved treatment. And for many rare diseases, the promising treatments actually get stuck in the clinical development pipeline. There's numerous reasons for this, specifically because of rare diseases, including small patient populations, heterogeneous disease presentation, limited natural history studies, lack of understanding in underlying disease biology, so in the discovery and preclinical stage, high regulatory hurdles, high development costs, and limited industry interest. And all of this kind of contributes to this statistic where 85% of clinical trials for orphan drugs, this excludes oncology indications, actually don't reach regulatory approval. So this is from phase 1 all the way to marketing approval. 85% of these drugs fail. If you do include oncology indications, this statistic is even worse. I think it's about 94%. And I argue that this is where we need to be focusing our attention, because by addressing the clinical development pipeline and making more efficiencies in this sector of like the drug development process, we're going to be able to bring more treatments to patients and reduce the 95% of rare diseases that don't have a treatment. So how are we as an industry going to do this and support the rare and ultra-rare disease communities and bring more treatments to patients? This really is based on two solutions. One, building collaborative models between industry, patient advocacy groups, and academia, and then also the use of alternative trial designs and decentralized trials, both to accelerate progress and reduce cost. And this is what Elpida does. Elpida is a social purpose corporation streamlining the clinical development process for pediatric orphan diseases. How are we making this collaborative model between the patient advocacy groups, academia, and industry? It really, all three groups form a powerful triad, and everyone is needed to advance these rare disease therapeutics in a timely fashion. The patient advocacy groups provide insight and advocacy. They allow for collaboration and community. They help with trial enrollment and retention, and have regulatory policy influence. And I'd argue that the collaboration and community is one of these really fundamental aspects that patient advocacy groups can really help with to bring all of us together so that we can bring the treatments to back to the patients in need. And I'll talk about this later on as well. Academia provides the cutting-edge technology development, the novel discovery, and mechanistic insight, and expertise in the rare disease biology. This is, again, a lot on the discovery and preclinical development, but in addition, on the clinical development side, they have a strong hospital access. So academia is usually associated with the medical centers and centers of excellence. And then industry have the advanced infrastructure. They're the ones with the translational focus, interested in using the innovation to do something good. They have, again, with the infrastructure, they have the manufacturing and scale-up capabilities and the regulatory expertise to market the drug. So at Elpida, we form the strategic partners with all of these groups, the academia, industry, and patient advocacy groups, to build this consortium, and that's focused on one mission: to bring the therapeutics to patients in need. Our core team and collaborators, we partner with rare disease experts that are global. We looked through the numbers last week, and we're partnered with 9 medical centers, 7 biotech companies, 6 family foundations, and then something that I'm not going to touch on in the talk today, but also 4 state and federal agencies, which are also critical for bringing therapeutics to patients. All 3 of these groups, the patient advocacy groups, academia, and industry, have to be working together throughout the entire pipeline, starting from discovery to marketing, to ensure that all goals are aligned and that we can efficiently move the product further faster. I have here like this classic traditional clinical development pipeline from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3, but Elpida and just, I think, the rare disease community, you see a lot of the times where we can put the 3 phases together into one phase 1/3 trial, also, again, to increase efficiencies, and it's something that we do at Elpida Therapeutics and all of our drugs in pipeline. Elpida's model brings academia and industry together, and taking the best of both into how we run the company. So this isn't necessarily what I was talking about before by where we need academia and industry and patient advocacy groups to help bring the therapeutics to patients, but this is more on how Elpida runs to save time and money while we develop therapeutics. In green is kind of what we're focused on. So in academia, we can use the flexible trial designs, as open label trials, different control groups, different from what industry standard is with double-blind placebo-controlled trials. We also use central IRBs and multiple sites to help help with access for patients as they're enrolled in trials. We save money by not using CROs and also have just a smaller budget. But between academia and industry's goals, we get to do both publishing data and marketing drugs. And we get to take advantage of funding sources that are seen in both of these industries. So academia funding from patient advocacy groups and grants, and industry's classic funding from venture capital and other investments and in-kind partnerships with industry. Okay. And yeah, again, this model cuts down costs associated with clinical development and also increases efficiency. So by cutting down time, we can cut down the costs. We're cutting down time by combining these phase 1-3 trials, doing some concurrent natural history studies, and being innovative by how we use control arms in our studies. And we're really leading with the end in mind, bringing these therapeutics back to patients to provide meaningful outcomes. This whole session is kind of wanting to focus on patient considerations, and I like to think of this analogy where patient advocacy groups are really the what's keeping all of this afloat. They are what is they bring everyone together. They bring the regulators, the researchers, the companies all together in this common goal of bringing therapeutics back to patients. And really, without them, we wouldn't get to where we want to be. And a lot of times, they're the ones that are providing the early funding and driving the strategic goals for what they want to see in with their disease. I'll give a example of this, and this is our lead program at Elpida Therapeutics. This is a case study with spastic paraplegia 50 or SPG 50. You can see, I think I have a pointer. This is Terry. This is the founder and CEO of Elpida Therapeutics. His son Michael was diagnosed with SPG 50, which is a progressive neurological disease, which typically presents in quadriplegia by teenage years. And there was no treatment for SPG 50 when Michael was diagnosed. There's only about 100 patients known worldwide with this disease. So the journey started in 2019 with Michael's diagnosis. A family foundation, Cure SPG 50, was created that same year, really to fund and support development of a therapeutic for that disease. So this group was able to bring together researchers at UT Southwestern, Boston Children's, and the NIH to develop a therapeutic, a gene therapy for SPG 50. And within a few years, these institutions were able to provide the preclinical data needed in cellular models, animal models, and non-human primates to get CTA and IND approval, so approval for clinical trials in Canada and the US. So the first patient was dosed in 2022. This was Terry's son in an open label phase 1 trial in Canada. And this moved into a phase 1-2 trial in the US, where we've dosed 4 patients, including the youngest patient we are aware of to be treated with the intrathecal gene therapy. This study is being done at UT Southwestern, and last year we were also able to dose patients through compassionate use in London and Spain. This year we plan to start phase 2B trials in Italy, England, and Germany, and start the phase 3 pivotal trial in the US. So by the end of 2025, we'll have 5 clinical gene therapy programs for rare diseases using our model. And really just how I want to end this is that we have the vision, and really the center for execution is creating this community of all stakeholders. So bringing the patient advocacy groups together with the academic institutions, academic researchers, and industry professionals. And together we can provide meaningful treatments to patients through innovation and teamwork, make a lasting global impact in the gene therapy and rare disease space, and also just model a platform to quickly and efficiently conduct successful clinical trials for rare disease. And yeah, that's how I want to end it. Thank you for supporting this mission by coming to this session. And yeah, our whole goal is to accelerate life-saving gene therapies for these kids with rare diseases. We're on social media, we have a website, and this is Terry's email, or the CEO and founder, but any of us at the team are happy to speak to you. So thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Our final speaker before panel discussion will be Julia Taravella. Julia is the founder and executive director of the Rare Trait Hope Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to advancing treatments for ultra-rare diseases. Driven by personal experience, Julia works to bridge gaps in research and patient care, fostering collaboration between scientists, clinicians, and advocacy groups. Her leadership has helped catalyze innovative therapeutic approaches, offering hope to underserved rare disease communities. Julia is a passionate advocate for empowering patients and families worldwide. Welcome, Julia.
Hello. I'll tell you my story. I think my story lasted probably for quite a while now. It's all started with my kids who were diagnosed with ultra-rare disease. I think we made any mistakes possible that's out there. Hopefully, somebody will be able to avoid those mistakes, and maybe we'll be able to learn on those and progress further on. Anybody who would listen carefully to the presentations, I will have one present. So this is my children. It's Daniel and Alexander. They were both born normal. At one point when Daniel was 2 and 3, something didn't seem right, but everybody was okay with that. He just didn't speak properly. He was falling down sometimes, but nothing serious. They put tubes in his ears, gave him extra medication, and whenever Alexander was 6 months old, I noticed exactly the same pattern. I didn't know what to do. But something was wrong. It took me another 10 years to figure out what's wrong with the kids. We went to multiple doctors trying to figure out what was going on with them. Never was able to get the proper diagnosis. I end up buying a commercially available DNA sequencing kits, downloading raw data, writing a program, and figuring out what gene is not working. After that, went back to the doctor and asked them to test for this particular 5 years prior to that, the kids were actually tested for that disease, but tests came down false negative. And the reason for that, it's ultra-rare disease. So the standard that they used didn't work. After the kids were diagnosed, the oldest one by that time was 18 years old. So literally it took 15 years to diagnose him. And so the younger one was 12. But the diagnosis came with also the email that state, I'm sorry, but there is no treatment for the disease. And that's where we start, okay, it took so long to diagnose, let's figure out how long it will take to find a treatment. So what they have something that's called aspartyl glucosaminosurea, AGU for short. So this is the enzyme that breaks down N-glucoproteins in the body. N-glucoproteins, it's like lots of hormones or similar things present. They have to be in the body all the time. So the ones that you cannot get rid of your diet because the body is producing that. It's neurodegenerative disorder. So every single child is diagnosed with autism and with ADHD because it's affect processing of the person. So the very first issue that is diagnosed with those children is speech and language issues. And that's what my kids were having. The biggest reason is we went through years of speech therapy because we've been told all the time that a little bit more, and they will be speaking properly. So it's developmental delays, and then because it's the degradation of glucoproteins that is based on that's also present in the connective tissues. So it is skeletal abnormality, it's gait disturbance, intellectual disability. And as a result, it's premature death about, dependent on for males, it's between 25 and 30, for females, 30, 35. And there's only about 400 patients known globally. When I started trying to develop the treatment for the disease, I could not figure out why, first of all, I cannot find any other patients with that disease, or in generally why I cannot find patients with similar diseases like mine. We're talking about rare diseases, but for some reason I was kind of hitting the block when I've been told that there is 7,000 rare diseases around. As you probably seen that slide all the time, so it is 7,000 rare disorders, up to 10,000. 50% of those are children. I could never find like why I cannot see those. So literally, if there is a 10% of the people with rare diseases in this room, we should have like so many people there. We should know the rare diseases. So what's going on? It's like why I cannot find the people who will help me develop those gene therapies or actually treatment for my children and similar children. What I found out several years after, it's actually tricky. So there is an article published, and there is actually lots of studies published on that. So those 7,000 diseases, that's fully correct. But if we are looking at those 7,000 diseases and we'll try to assess them, then we'll exclude actually diseases. So non-rare disease with prevalence over 5 in 10,000. We will get rid of the subtypes of the same disorder. So it's the same gene, but different phenotype. We're going to get rid of the infectious diseases. Ebola is a rare disease. Then poisons or snake bites, because it's a rare disease. Diseases with no unknown prevalence. What we'll find out that there is actually 3,500 of those diseases. And then let's look more about what's going on in those diseases. So as you can see over here on the bottom, that's actually a prevalence. So the prevalence of the diseases, that's about like under 1 in 10,000. So they affect 77 to 80% of those 10% of the rare disease population, but there are only 149 of those diseases. And that's where the pharmaceutical company actually are focusing their developments. Those are diseases that are beta thalassemia, alpha thalassemia, and so on. And you know, that's the companies that's working to develop those treatments because they still will be extremely profitable. Then if we'll go down in prevalence, there is almost 17 to 20%, but there is 241%. The example of those diseases, that's where SMA is. And you know that pharmaceutical company is working on that. So this is that is the diseases that's also actually able to be proven commercially viable. And then there is a little bit over 3,000 diseases literally majority of the rare diseases, but that's the ultra-rare diseases. That's the diseases that Elpida is working, that's my kid's disease. So literally, but the amount of population that's affected by those diseases, they call them non-commercial diseases, they're only 300,000 people in US and Europe. So it's the majority of the diseases, but it's literally extremely small amount of population combining affected by that. So when I finally realized what I'm dealing with, literally there is kind of no help and no hope to figuring out what's the commercial application, standard commercial applications. I worked as the middle management in extremely huge company in the oil industry. So I decided to figure applying my learnings from that industry into those rare disease, ultra-rare disease industry. You probably have heard all the time, I mean, it's oil and whatever, we talked about that. So once we were reporting the reserves, we reported the reserves as approved reserves and as technically recoverable reserves. So it's the proved reserves that we know for sure what is there, and there is technically recoverable reserves. But we usually never talked about economically recoverable reserves because that number always fluctuates throughout the years. Sometimes it's the low gas prices, sometimes it's high gas prices, sometimes there is war somewhere, like you cannot assess the stuff. And that's what the rare diseases are. Actually, it's the technically recoverable reserves, but right now it's not economically recoverable. So that's exactly what it is. So I figure out that my goal is actually how we can switch that technically recoverable reserves into the economically one. So if we can do that, maybe all together, we can progress. So then I start organizing myself so what is the difference in how I can approach that? What is the difference between those common diseases and the ultra-rare diseases? Because if I understand what's my givens, maybe I can figure out where to go. So in a common disease, it's a large diverse populations. This is a very small one. And a result of that, it's the patient recruitment. In a common diseases, there is large number of patients, placebo controlled, they're everywhere. So there is companies that's organized to have that. This is patient dispersed everywhere globally. The common diseases, it's high commercial potential, so everything is given. And this is actually, majority of the stuff is actually results from those high commercial potential. In ultra-rare diseases, we have to focus on the cost recovery, literally what we need to do. And so as a result of that, this is all well-funded by pharma, biotechs, and then it is venture capitalists and so on. Over here, we have to rely on grants, philanthropy, advocacy groups. So, and that's what the results of that. So manufacturing scale, totally different. So assuming all of that, so where do we go? When you have those givens, now you have to organize yourself, how your stakeholders, and what you need to do with that. So the main stakeholders is your patients or legally responsible adults, if it is children. So you need to understand what everybody wants. You have to put them on the same line, so you have to organize what single person is want. If one group is want one, another group wants one, so pulling each other not into the same goal, it's very, very difficult. So of course, what patients want is access to safe and effective treatment that will improve health and quality of life. But the patients' families, if it is the adult patients or it is caregivers, they actually want to minimum, they want the treatment, but they want to minimize their own emotional and financial burden. The regulatory agencies, and that's what we need to start with, they want to ensure safe and efficient medicine. Researchers, there's lots of researchers around, but their main goal would be publish high-impact papers. So you have to give them that project that will result in high-impact papers, recognition, grants, ability, and stuff like that. The industry leaders, they need to drive innovation to create profitable therapies, biopharms company, and so on. So everybody, when you align everybody with the same goal and give somebody the goal that they want, that's when you can align people. There is a minimum road from the concept to clinic. This is the standard progression. But one of the things is what I see now, really, don't start with why. Don't start with what, start with why. So define your goals. What is your goal? And then after that, once you set your why, you need to set your minimum requirements is for safety and efficacy, because it's the regulators that control that. So it needs to be safe, and then you have to prove that patient can live longer, feel better, or function better. That's all it is. And based on that, there's 2 points. You have to define those minimum roadmap, and don't go out and do some kind of crazy stuff, just the research for the sake of the research. So what did we do? That's why I said that that's a disaster roadmap, what we did so far. We started in 12 years ago. We had pre-IND meeting 5 years after that. This particular project was kind of leased to like 3 biopharmaceutical companies that tried to progress, but then they realized it's not enough patients, then they get out, and that's one of the things that it took a while to kind of us to restart the program. But hopefully we'll submit IND sometimes this quarter. How much does it cost? How much does it cost? Usually all of the preclinical work is somewhere between $500,000 to $2 million. And that's one of the reasons why we still do work as a nonprofit, because nonprofit work is still on the lower side, as the commercial work is still on the higher side. It still can be able to do some of the, get some write-offs, some other ways of doing business for the nonprofit, which results in the cheaper solutions. The IND enabling hence toxicology, GMP production, and biodistribution studies, somewhere between $2 million to $15 million. That's extremely high range, but that's one of the things that it's lower range usually on the nonprofit side and high ranges on the commercial side. And that's our quotes came for the clinical trials, and it's actually ranges between 100,000 to 400,000 per patient for exactly the same clinical trials, exactly the same processes. All of those differences is different sites, which is crazy. Oh, I think I skipped something, but it's okay. That's our kids. That's hopefully waiting for the clinical trial, relying really, oh, I know what I skipped. I don't think, can you go to the one slide before? Yes. So, and additional resources, what can be done to reduce the costs. So for the nonprofit or for ultra-rare diseases development, so it's material donations, definitely work with vendors to reduce cost of goods. Anybody can sponsor ultra-rare events. Data sharing, I think Andrea talked about that, is publishing information in exchange to the data that's needed for the commercial company to progress their developments. We get actually lots of consultants from employees from the large companies. Large companies actually doing now that you can do so many 4 hours, whatever, every week for the consultant and help it. It's actually helped us a lot to progress. Several companies actually in the very beginning sponsored my attendees to different conferences before I start speaking, which helped me a lot just to learn and meet new people. So providing marketing or different types of engagements, employee engagements. We did a lots of companies' employee engagements in exchange to the services that company can provide. Nonprofits or ultra-rare diseases companies can provide references and tax incentives to suppliers and so on. And I think that's this is like very similar to what Elpida was talking about. It's the ultra disease company is actually working together with researchers, families, industries, regulatory agencies, has to kind of mingle all of that and make that work. Yeah, that's our kids. Hopefully we will progress that pretty soon. All of that, I talked about it. We just published a book that's available on Amazon. It's my cat's perspective on gene therapy. And it's 100% profits. It supports development of the ultra-rare disease. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. I think I'm going to owe you a royalty because I need to borrow that slide about technical reserves and economic. Yeah. So each time I'll kick a few dollars to AGU. Yep. All right. So we are ready to begin our panel. So I invite the panelists to join me on stage while I introduce. In addition to our two speakers, we have two phenomenal additional panelists joining us. We have Dr. Sawad Mesahel, a neuroscientist with a PhD in clinical neurology, who's the head of clinical operations at Elpida Therapeutics. Sawad has over 20 years experience in translational neuroscience and in novel drug discovery pathways, biomarker development, and clinical trials. Her skills focused on clinical development of therapies for a rare neurological disease, and she manages a portfolio of multiple disease programs with extensive experience across all phases of clinical trials and regulatory milestones across the US and Europe. Susan Bresendine is a patient advocacy leader and communication specialist serving the healthcare and life sciences industry. Susan has worked at companies including Bluebird Bio, Novartis Gene Therapies, GSK, and Foundation for Cell and Gene Medicine, where she developed and executed impactful programs to support patient communities and build strategic partnerships. She is currently the vice president of stakeholder collaboration at NephCure, a patient advocacy organization leading the revolution in rare protein spilling kidney disease research. Susan also manages a health communications firm that connects clients with talented consultants. All right, with that, so we have about 20 minutes for Q&A. As moderator, I'm going to take the prerogative of first and last question, but I invite the audience to think of your questions now, because I'd love to make sure that we have an engaging conversation that really allows industry to discuss with our panelists what they can do. All right, so I'll take a seat. So thank you again for the excellent presentations and also for your time today. I would love to hear, we heard so many different challenges, and I think it would be helpful to the audience to kind of get a sense of order of magnitude. So maybe you could help identify, what do you think the most critical or the top most critical barriers are for advanced therapy development for rare and ultra-rare diseases? Anyone can start.
I'll just begin by, obviously we're in the neurogenetic space, so the challenges with delivering gene therapies in pediatrics, first of all, and delivering gene therapies to the brain, which are, what you heard Julia talk about, and her mission, but also Elpida's mission, that comes with its own challenges in terms of the preclinical development, getting the dose right, getting the route of administration right, and getting the timing of treatment right, because obviously all these kids present to us already symptomatic. And so this is the issue: is how do we really make a difference when they already have the disease, and what we're trying to do is bring meaningful treatments, and how do we measure that? So those are the challenges that we face with just developing these drugs, but also trying to fit the model into, and I always have this kind of analogy, we have this square of rare disease, and the regulatory agencies want us to fit it into this circle and saying, here's a framework, you need to fit your model into this framework. Well, it doesn't fit. You need to change your framework to allow us to progress these diseases. So just from the regulatory perspective, and we're seeing a lot of improvements in, the FDA really trying to work very, with the rare disease community now to help advance these programs. But if I had to choose one single thing, it's definitely the funding. There is just no funding out there to advance these programs, and it's closing in. It's getting, it's becoming, now with the new administration, we have no idea whether there's even going to be grants available, federal level grants or funding to be able to support something that we can apply to. So there's very little philanthropic investment out there. When we approach investors, they want this huge return of investment, which is just not financially viable. So there really does need to be a different approach to why to invest. I mean, if you want to help us save children, come along the journey with us. But if you're looking for a bottom dollar and a return of investment, it's just not going to deliver. So it's the funding is the most challenging in this space. And again, we don't know what's going to happen with the renewal of the priority review voucher, and so everything's kind of closing in on us at this. And the fact that we're all still alive and we're able to do what we're able to do is pretty much a miracle right now.
I will add to that. Besides the funding, which is
the challenge.
Yes, it's a challenge. I think one of the, it's not the challenges, but one of the kind of really interesting things that I can see the biggest difference between ultra-rare diseases and everything else is actually communications. It is, so there is you have to decide, so you have a very actually narrow margin arrow in those gene therapies. And you have to make sure that it's all right. Like the result would be the best possible. But because there is only few people working on those developments, and lots of times when people working on the developments, it's a prevalent voices. So it's also going to the statistics and to those rules of small numbers. And you have to draw as many numbers of the actually internal parties to trying to make the best decision as possible. And that's what's challenging is kind of, one of the things is what needs to be done is, and one of the things that what I see like those ultra rare disease foundations or advocates of who needs to move forward is actually to go out and talk to as many people as possible, trying to gather as many experiences as many as possible. And it is hard in every industry. It's hard in this industry because of the kind of silos everybody's working on. Not too many people want to share, especially large industries. But that's what we're drawing on, the knowledge and the progress is actually the communications. So especially, sometimes lately, I've been calling myself to everybody that I'm just a clown, just going and talking, performing, whatever, to everybody. Just talk, continuous talk, trying to actually to find out I think we have pretty good relations, for example, with Elpida, like we talk on a weekly basis, yes? And several other we talk, but if the communications will be existed or we can establish with the larger companies that can teach us and progress us and help us, that will be such a major, such a major win. Susan?
Kind of along the lines of communication, but I will just say, if there's anything we've learned this week, gene therapy is hard. It's really hard. It's complex. And I've worked directly on 4 gene therapies through launch. And, it's a long path to yes for many patients. The process in some cases is long, and there's just not the awareness and understanding and education out there for the patient community yet. I'm sure there's some examples of really well-educated and motivated patient communities, especially those that have, short-term life-threatening diseases, without question. But, we're seeing commercial launches in therapies where patients are relatively well controlled. It's not immediately life-threatening. Somebody talked in the market access session yesterday about just the novelty of these products, and they're intimidating for patients, and it just takes them a long time, I think, to consider and explore and have the conversations with their loved ones and their healthcare teams. And so, this is where patient advocacy groups can really help. One company cannot generate the awareness and education that they need to. It's impossible. I mean, we know how long it takes to inform people. You are, a public health advocate. It takes a long time to change people's minds, to change their behavior. And we all have to do this together. There has to be some cooperative, collaborative funding long before launch. And patient groups should really be helping with this. Patient groups should really be digging into their communities to helping people understand the promise of gene therapy, what it is, what it isn't, manage expectations, talk about long-term needs for monitoring well before a product is at launch. I think that's really needed.
I'll add on to it. I think the biggest challenge is lack of knowledge, especially in this ultra-rare disease space, and it ties into what everyone said, that groups don't want to fund this because there's just not enough known, it's too risky. There's not a lot of communication just because there's not a lot of people working on the disease. If you think of really any of these rare diseases, there's maybe 1 or 2 academic researchers that are studying this in the lab in the world. And again, 1 or 2 physicians that know this disease in and out. And just this sheer lack of knowledge kind of contributes to this hard path in progressing the therapeutics forward. And yeah, I definitely agree that education needs to be a forefront in helping people understand what rare diseases are, why it's important to be focusing on them and working on therapeutic development for these rare diseases. But it's just, I think it's really because of just sheer lack of knowledge.
All right, as promised, I'm happy to turn it over to the audience if there's any audience questions.
Julia, you mentioned a challenge finding other patients like Daniel and Alexander. Do you have any advice from your learned experiences for other caregivers who find themselves in this situation?
I think those challenges are really different for different diseases. To me, is the way how I separate the diseases is there is dramatic diseases where the child or the patient has some kind of dramatic occurrences and will come to medical attention. Let's say the child has seizures, the child has some kind of physical issues that they will 100% will seek elsewhere help. As the disease that we have, that's I deal with right now, it's extremely lame disease. Every single one, child is walking, kind of talking, so they're all diagnosed with autism. So that's one of the reasons we couldn't find. So what I start noticing in the last 3 years, all of a sudden we start getting patients more and more with that disease for what's it called? For 8 years, there was only 4 patients in the United States, and 2 of them were my kids. And in the last 3 years, we got 20 more patients due to the whole exome sequencing. So it is kind of backward, because the people is like, when they get diagnosed with autism, they're happy with that autism diagnosis, and they're not searching is what is the basics for the autism diagnosis. So the dramatic diseases are a lot more easier to diagnose and find patients.
So I'm gonna say to Julia as well. So Julia, I know your story. You shared it with me, but not at this degree. And I just want to commend you at what you've done. It is absolutely amazing as a strong mother looking for the safety net of trying to save your children. So thank you for sharing all of that. And it's amazing what you've done. And I want to highlight, because I mentioned to you this patient advocacy program called ZBRICS, and I had connected you with Anne-Marie. I don't know if you've spoken. I'm going to make sure I reach out, because I keep feeling like that's something. There's this connection between the industry and the money and the people, the patients, and all of that. And I feel, and the education, and I feel like there's something there that can really help with those connections through what she's created. So I will do that and make sure that I follow up with you. It just keeps popping up in my head as I'm listening. I just want to thank everybody for the making this visible and having the communication and what we need to do to really educate around it.
I want to add to that's a really good point. And education has been mentioned a few times, and we are trying to make efforts to really reach the extended rare disease community. And we at Elpida, we get 5 to 10 phone calls a week from a new family that has been diagnosed with another disease that is not in our pipeline, and they're just reaching out. How are you doing this? Will you take my disease program on? They're lost. They don't know where to go. They have no idea how to navigate. And these are newly diagnosed families. I mean, they're dealing with the diagnosis, just the lack of knowledge that's out there. So we try to, what we've realized is that there is this gap in this in education. So we're making these efforts to, first of all, I mean, if you go on our website at elpida.com, we publish everything that we're allowed to publish. That isn't under like our IND. We publish the clinical protocols, consent forms, so that companies and non-profit organizations can pull these templates and see what the regulators want to see in these INDs, and how to design a clinical protocol for a gene therapy. And that our investigator brochure is published for our lead program, and we plan to publish everything. It's there. What we've found out is that so many organizations have come to us and said, "Oh, I'm so glad we're using that template. We're just plugging in our own information," and they can see all of the information that is needed in an IND to get to the clinic. And we are a clinical stage company. But, if we can support getting to the clinic as quick as possible, that's, submission. The other thing that we have done, and this is something that Andrea has led this, is create videos and like an educational series, which we're going to put on also on our website, which is basically, what is gene therapy? What is what is genetic therapies? What other modalities are available? How do you navigate this space? What's the first step you need to do? And Andrew did a fantastic job of just interviewing leaders in the field, including Peter Marks, who's the head of ZEBA. Right the way. So it's almost like an entire journey of from not even having a mouse model to getting a drug approved. What does that look like in this space? And we've interviewed and brought together all of this information in this educational series that we want to have available, so that we don't have to get 5 to 10 phone calls a week of family. They can just go straight to our website, learn all of this information, and if they still need to talk to us, and for us to be able to provide resources to them, we're more than happy to help. It's just that there's just more and more and more families reaching out. So yeah, it's I'm trying.
All right. Well, I think we only have time for, is it comment or question?
Um, it's a question. So basically, we know funding is a challenge, and so we hear this buzzword, venture philanthropy. So perhaps maybe you guys could speak to that. Like, what do you think that is? How do we grow that community? How do we get? It's basically donations, but how do we get people sort of organized around that? What do we have to do to deliver on that to really grow a venture philanthropy community?
Do you want me to? I'll start off. I mean, I think it's the shared. We're all trying to do the same thing. So the way Elpida works is that we have companies all lined up, and again, academic institutions. You heard from Andrea's presentation. Companies like our manufacturers, Virogen, who manufacture our drug product. We have academic institutions, St. Jude's Hospital, the NIH, Sick Kids Hospital, UT Southwestern, all providing some kind of in-kind or service or material or something that they specialize in. Like, for example, Roche have agreed to do all our biomarker discovery for free. These are the kind of things that it's a partnership. It's about, do you want to help address do you want to be part of the solution rather than the problem? And so if these companies all come together in these academic institutions and hospitals come together to say, well, we can treat patients at no cost if you provide drug product. So you go to the manufacturers, what can you do? Can you provide drug product at a very, at little cost? And it's about, providing materials and services to address this huge problem that I think BGTC, the Bespoke Gene Therapy Consortium, as you probably know, that was born out of the Accelerated Medicines program at the foundation of the NIH. This is what this consortium is about, but it's a very overwhelming, elaborate, with all of these big companies all involved in this space. And so what you have is companies, obviously, they can't share their intellectual property, they can't share their processes, they don't. So there are barriers in all of this. In order to you can bring a consortium of people together, but are you really truly going to share resources? It's a very different thing. And I think the model that we're trying to create is come together, come on the journey. This is a true partnership to address this significant unmet medical need. The doctors want to treat their patients. The institutions want to publish. They want to be in the forefront of advancements and leadership in this field. But at the same time, you have to leverage all of that expertise from it to bring people together. So philanthropic investment is really about partnering, providing services, and then when there is a win, everyone gets a piece of the pie, which is leveraging the priority review voucher, the licensing of the drug product, and that's everyone comes together and everyone gets a piece of the pie. It's really how we do this.
So unfortunately, we don't have time for another question, but I want to make sure that everyone leaves here with an action step. And one easy action step is to find a member of this panel before the end of the conference and ask them this question. What can I do for you in the next 12 months? What can my company do for you in the next 12 months? Julia had a phenomenal slide that, I don't know if we can pull it up so that everyone can take a photo before they leave this room, of a laundry list of ways that this specific set of stakeholders could be contributing to this mission. Whether that is authorizing employees to contribute time explicitly toward advising these projects, whether that's donating consumables, whether that's adopting ultra rare as an explicit formal CSR priority for your company's philanthropic giving. And I want you to take it one step further. In addition to asking this group of people, what can we do in the next 12 months? I want you to take that answer back to your companies, and not this group of people, these kinds of stakeholders that are driving these agendas forward have extraordinary burdens in terms of all of the things that they're expected to do. And hunting down companies at conferences like this one, doesn't have to be on that list. So if you think that your company has that wherewithal to donate consumables, to offer an at-cost run, or a deferred payment agreement, or a risk-sharing agreement, or the opportunity to be the focus of this year's Rare Disease Day fundraiser, then cultivate that opportunity internally, develop it, and actually bring it to stakeholders like ours, right? Because developing these kinds of opportunities for you to support doesn't need to be on the list of things that, these social benefit 501c3 therapeutic developers are taking on. So that's my mandate. Ask what you can be doing, figure out what you think makes sense, and actually go back to your organizations and make it happen, and then bring it, instead of having us hunt those things down and develop them on your behalf. All right, thank you so much.